Good morning. Welcome. I'm glad you're with us. Have you ever lost anything that's precious to you? Have you ever lost anything valuable? Anything of great worth? You ever lost it? A couple years ago, context here real quick. I have a tendency to fidget a little bit. I have bad ADHD, so I'm always tossing, messing with something, and my foot's shaking. It used to be my phone. I've gotten over that now that I started paying for it. Once I started paying for my phone, and after I broke several of them, then I got rid of that. That wasn't a bad habit anymore. But one of the things that I'm real bad with is I fidget with my ring. I play with my ring, and whenever I'm sitting there thinking of something, I'm playing with my ring. So a few years ago, I've only been married for a couple years, and a few years ago, right after we got married, I want to say 2 or 3 weeks, we went to Momentum Youth Conference. And so that's a conference for teenagers, and it's a big conference, thousands of kids, huge event, all right? And there's these big services that they do, several times a day. And so we're at one of the services, and it's not just a church service. If you've ever been there, it's like they do a lot of fun stuff. Kids are jumping up and down, and yes, then there is a church service, but there's just a lot of stuff going on. So we're going in and we're sitting down, thousands of people. We're at big, humongous auditorium, theater seating, concrete floors, and I'm sitting there before it gets started, fidgeting with my ring, and I dropped it, and my ring rolled down. And right as that started going on, thousands of kids, then it's time for worship to start. Everybody stands up. And so for the whole service, it's a 2-hour thing. I mean, it's a long time. It's not just a church service. They do announcements and games and things, and then there's a church service, and then there's more worship. And that whole time, I have to admit, I wasn't thinking about anything that was going on. I don't know who was speaking. I don't know. Like normally during the worship songs, I'm trying to get into it, and I'm thinking about one thing. Oh my gosh, I've been married 2 weeks and I just lost my wedding ring. I just lost my wedding ring, and I'm just thinking about it. I gotta get this thing. And so as soon as the service came to an end, I told our group, I said, all right, we can't leave. It's time, normally we're supposed to go meet with our youth group and have this. I said, we gotta stay. We've got to find my wedding ring. It's rolled down. And I started going around and asking people, hey, can you help me find my wedding ring? And I'm asking kids as they're going, did you see my wedding ring? Did you find my wedding ring? What's it look like? It looks like a ring. It's little, okay? And so we're looking for it. And I'm starting to think in my mind, what is my wife going to say to me? Oh my goodness, this is not good. And then finally a kid walks up and he says, hey, I found this. Is this what you're looking for? And he brought it to me. You get that feeling, right? If you ever lost anything really valuable and then found it, it is a feeling of relief. It's a feeling of celebration. It's a feeling of joy. It's a good feeling. We're talking about lost things today. We're talking about lost treasure this morning. And we're going to look at 3 stories in the Bible. They're familiar stories. Maybe you've heard them before. They're parables, which means they're fictional stories about a possibly real event, but they're fictional, and they tell a really important spiritual truth. All 3 stories are told by Jesus. All 3 stories are in Luke chapter 15. Jose read the first of the 3 stories, and we're going to look at them quickly. It takes up almost the whole chapter, basically, are these stories. So we're going to look at them quickly. But they're fairly simple, and they tell one important point. Now, just a little bit of context. If you're looking at Luke chapter 15, the context of these stories is verses 1 and 2. This is where Jesus is at. And he says, now the tax collectors and sinners were drawing near to Jesus. All right? These are people who are not godly, righteous people. Tax collectors in that day are not like employees of the IRS, even though some of us might think they're unrighteous too. But they are quite literally unrighteous. They're crooked people that often stole from people, that did things wrong. So tax collectors are bad people. And of course, sinners, these are people who are far from God. They didn't go to the temple too often. They didn't know the temple songs. All right? These are people far from God. far from God, and they're drawing near to Jesus. And the Pharisees, now these are people, if we're thinking like modern day, if we were to translate this, we're talking about, the people far away from God, the non-church people are coming in, and the Pharisees and the scribes, they're like the teachers, the pastors, the super religious people, the religious leaders of the day. They're grumbling, and they're saying, this man receives sinners and he eats with them. And so then with that context, Jesus then tells these three stories. He tells three stories. The first story he tells, which is what Jose just read, is a story about a lost sheep. And there's a shepherd who loses a sheep. And just so you know, when you look at this and you think about it, in that day and age, if you were a shepherd, the sheep were not your pet. They were not your pet. They were your livelihood. They were your livelihood. You lived with the sheep. You slept with the sheep. You did not go anywhere without the sheep. There were no days off for the shepherds. Those were their sheep. And so he kind of poses the question, if you lost a sheep, wouldn't you go looking for it? Of course you go looking for it. And by the way, it's not like the 99 sheep are going to, he's not abandoning the 99 sheep. The 99 sheep are safe. And so the first story is a shepherd, and he's lost a sheep. And he goes after and he looks for it. And by the way, if you don't know anything about sheep, they are incredibly dumb animals. Incredibly dumb animals. They will not find their way home. And so he goes out on a search for the sheep. And the story tells us that he found it. And when he found it, verse 5, it says, he laid it on his shoulders, rejoicing. Now just think about that for a second. When he found the sheep, he took the sheep and he laid it on his shoulders. He didn't lead the sheep back. He laid it on his shoulders. He carried the sheep back to the 99. We don't know if the sheep was hurt. We don't know if the sheep just was not able to walk. We don't know if the sheep was lazy. The shepherd caring for his sheep. He loves his sheep. He cares deeply for them. And he picks it up and he takes it back and he's rejoicing. Like that feeling I got when I lost my ring and I found it. That feeling you get when you've lost something and you look around the house and you found it. But this is a lost sheep. He's rejoicing. What's the point of the story? What's the point of the story? What's the point of the story? Jesus tells us, verse 7, just so I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner, one person who's far away from God, who repents, than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. If you are far from God, He cares for you. He cares for you. Like that sheep who is far from the shepherd. When the shepherd finds him, he doesn't kick the sheep in the butt. You dumb sheep. What does he do? He picks the sheep up. He doesn't even try and lead the sheep with a treat like I do my dog, to get him back in. He picks up the sheep, puts it on his shoulder. He carries it back. He cares for the sheep. Hurting, weak, foolish. He cares for the sheep. If you're far from God, He cares for you. And He's searching for you. He's searching for you. Second story. Tells us that there's a woman, verse 8, I'll read it very quickly, it's a short story. Or what woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one coin, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and seek diligently until she finds it? And when she found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost. This time it's a coin. It's a coin. Now, we don't know exactly how much the coin was worth. Most people think it was probably worth about a day's labor. And so this coin, and you're talking about a day and age where people were literally struggling for their life. So to lose out on a coin could be the difference between surviving when it comes to winter, right? You're talking about a significant amount of money. A day's work may not seem a big deal to you, but those 10 coins is probably all the money that she has saved. She's got 10 days advance. After that, the food is out. And we don't know about the woman's situation. I think it's interesting. I picture a widow, only because I think of the widow and the poor widow who drops the widow's mite. But we don't know. It just mentions a woman. It's a fictional story. So Jesus is just creating an image in our head. But she loses a coin, and she searches diligently for it. It says that she lit a lamp. She didn't turn on the lights. They didn't have electricity. She swept. She's searching until she can find the coin. And the nature of the search always tells you about how valuable the item is, right? The nature of the search will tell you about what it's worth. Normally in my pockets now, I have 4 things. I almost always have them in my pocket. I don't have them with me now, but normally I have my phone, I have my keys that are up there, I have a mask, which is a new addition to the last couple years, and then I got a wallet. I always have a wallet with me. If I go somewhere else, I don't have it here with me right now, but I would normally have a wallet. 3 of those 4 things, if I lose them, I do not leave the house. The one that I won't search for is the mask. I got like dozens of those things laying around. Why? The mask is not worth it. I will not search for the mask at all. I will wait for the mask to reappear outside of the laundry, right? Because the mask is not worth it. I'm not going to search for the mask. I know the mask is missing, but I'm not going to search for it. It's not valuable. But if I lose my wallet, if we're going to the store, if we're going to somebody's house and I lose my wallet, I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving. And I'm inviting everybody in the house, which is just my wife, to join me in on the search. And we are not leaving the house until we find the wallet. Have you ever had that? Or maybe your keys. Of course, the keys is a big one. Sometimes you can't even leave the house without your keys. You have to find it. And so you search diligently, and you're looking in places you don't, like, you know it's not there. But you need it. You need it, and you're searching diligently for it. Why? Because that which is lost is incredibly valuable. And when you find it, you celebrate. You celebrate. Or normally in my case, my wife tells me, don't put it underneath the dirty clothes pile, or, don't throw it underneath the couch or whatever. But I always lose my things in the weirdest places. I don't know what it is. It's not like they're hidden. They're always like right underneath, like on the ottoman, and I somehow missed it. But you celebrate. It's like, yes, finally, I can leave the house. Yes, finally, I have my wallet. Yes, I have my keys. Yes. The woman, she finds this coin, and this coin is so much more valuable than a wallet. For her, this could mean the difference between life or death. For her, that's all the money she has. She's got 10 coins, and she's lost 1/10 of her whole life savings, 10 days worth of food. And she says, yes. She invites the neighbors in. There's a party. I found my lost coin. What's the point of the story? What's the point of the story? Well, Jesus tells us again, verse 10. Just so I tell you, there is joy before the angels of God over one sinner who repents. If you are far from God, he values you. He values you. You are far more precious, far more valuable than a coin. It's just a story. He values you. You are worth it. And it's for that reason that he is searching for you. It's for that reason that he is searching for you. And he's searching intently, diligently. He's lit a lamp. He's sweeping the floor because he values you. There's a third story. This story is really familiar. Everybody knows this story, or most people do. It's probably one of the most famous stories in the Bible. It's certainly the most famous story that Jesus told. It's the story of the prodigal son. Story of the prodigal son. What could be more valuable than that? Have you noticed too that each one of these stories, the value goes up? First, a sheep out of 99, right? 100 sheep, one goes missing. One sheep. Then 10 coins, one goes missing. And then we get to 2 sons, and one goes missing. What could be more valuable than a child? Nothing. Nothing. Story tells us, and we're going to work through it quickly. Story tells us, Luke 15, verse 11. I'll read it. He said, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that's coming to me.' And he divided his property between them. Now, just so you know, in that day and age, and today, you did not get your inheritance until your father died. You didn't get the inheritance until he died. The very fact that the son is asking of his father for his inheritance is a tremendous insult. It's like saying, I wish you were dead. Give me the money now. Give me the money now. I want your stuff. But he asked for his inheritance early. And not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had, and he took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he'd spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. The father had lost his son. His son wronged him, his son took his things, and his son left. And some of us know that experience, maybe even with a child or with family or someone who's very close, who we love dearly, who has wronged us, and they've left. And so for some, this story that Jesus is telling hits the mark. I have no doubt that when he was sharing the story first, there were some who felt the same way. I've got a prodigal son. I've got a prodigal brother or sister or friend. So this son, it says in verse 14, and when he spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. And so he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. How far has he fallen? By the way, if you don't know anything about Jewish culture, they don't eat pigs. They don't touch pigs. They are not supposed to be around pigs at all. They are an unclean animal. And so the fact that this man is starving, broken, and hurting, and living amongst the pigs, and he wishes that he could eat the food the pigs are eating. He is at the lowest possible place he could ever be. He's hurting in a way that is just totally rock bottom. And then it begins to dawn on that man, that son. He realizes that he's got a father. He realizes that he has a father. And he knows that he's done wrong. And he doesn't think that the father probably is going to take him back, but at least he thinks to himself, my father has hired servants. He's got servants who are doing far better than I am right now. Perhaps if I return home, my father will make me a servant, and at least I can get out of this pig pen. And so the son begins to make his way home, and the scripture tells us, verse 20, and he arose and he came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him, and he felt compassion. And you can imagine in your head, you can see the scene as the son is returning, having been gone for so long, having wronged his father, having stolen from his father, having wished his father dead. And as he returns home, the father sees him, and he runs to him with compassion and embraces him. Why? Why? Because the father loves his son. Even though his son has wronged him, even though his son has abandoned him, even though his son has been gone, the father loves the son. The father loves the son, and when he sees the son, he runs to him and he embraces him. And the son said to him, Father, I've sinned against you, heaven, and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let us celebrate. For my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. There's nothing more precious than a child. It's something in the last few months that I begin to sort of grasp myself as having a new child. There's nothing more precious than that. And even though the son has wronged him, and even though the son has done tremendous evil, Father loves him. and he welcomes him back. What's the story mean? What's the story mean? Jesus isn't as clear in this story. He doesn't tell us forthright what the meaning of the story is, but we all get it, right? We all get it. If you're far from God, if you're been hanging out in the pig pen, if you're hurting and you're broken and you're longing for something better, the God of heaven loves you, and he's ready to welcome you back. He's ready to welcome you back. And he's going to run to you when he sees you. And there's going to be a feast and a celebration. He's ready to welcome you back. And the feeling might be, I'm unworthy. And you are. But the God of heaven loves you. He loves you. And he's ready to welcome you back. He's ready to welcome you home. I think these three stories tell one point that is beginning to crystallize. Jesus tells three stories, and so they all tell the same thing. If you're far from God, he cares for you. If you're far from God, he values you. And if you're far from God, he loves you. And he is searching for you diligently. And he's ready to welcome you home. We've been talking about the heart of God for the last 4 weeks, this being the 5th week. We've been talking about the heart of God. And it's so evident, right, from these stories, that if you are far from God, you are very close to his heart. He cares for you, he values you, and he loves you, and you are central to his heart. You are on his heart, and he's on an all-out mission to rescue you. That's what he's doing in the earth today. If you're far from God, you are near to his heart. I'd invite you this morning, if you feel as if you are far from God, I'd invite you this morning, I'd remind you that he cares for you, that he values you, and that he loves you, and he's ready to welcome you back. And in a minute or two, we'll invite you to have a chance to respond to that. But before we do, I have to mention that there's another brother in the last story. And some of you already know that, if you've heard the story before. You see, this is a story, the third story that Jesus tells is not a story of one lost brother. It's actually a story of two lost sons. It's two brothers. Both of them are lost. Both of them are actually far from God, far from their father. You see, verse 25 tells us about the older son. And tells us, it reads, "Now his older son was in the field, and when he came, he drew near to the house, and he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants, and he asked, 'What does this mean?' And he said to him, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he's received him back safe and sound.'" By the way, the whole killing the fattened calf thing, it's not just like taking out your aggression on the calf. They're having a feast. They're having a party. It's not really explicit there. They're having a party. They're having a meal. But it says the brother, verse 28, he was angry and refused to go in. And his father came out and entreated him, but he answered his father, "Look, these many years I've served you. I've never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him." And he said to him, the father, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But it was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found." You know, that brother, that other son, was near to God in proximity. He was in the Father's house, but he was miles away to his heart. How do we know that? Because the Father's heart longed for that lost son to come back. But he didn't. He could care less about his brother. As a matter of fact, it's worse than indifference. He is angry that his brother has returned and that his father is celebrating. He's actually opposed to the very heart of his father. I fear this morning, I wonder this morning if some of us are the second brother. We're near in proximity to God, but we're miles away from his heart. And the reason is because we've lost sight of the things that God cares about. And each week we've talked about several things that are near to God's heart. But this morning we talk about something that is absolutely central. And this is those who are far from God. And I fear this morning that perhaps some of us may be just as lost as that other brother was. It's interesting to me, right before these three stories, context. Right before these three stories that Jesus tells, there's a very familiar passage of Scripture. It's talking about the cost of discipleship. You may have heard this verse before. I'm not going to read the whole section, but it's chapter 14, verses 25 through 33. Now go figure, right? Go listen to this. I'm just going to read verse 27. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you desiring to build a tower does not first sit down and count the cost? Context of that, right? Jesus is talking about the cost of following him. What's it look like to follow Jesus? You want to follow me? What's it look like? You better count the cost. You better be ready to pick up your cross. And then immediately after he says that, he tells these three stories. Immediately after he says, what's it look like to follow me? It's hard. It's costly. Count it. And then he tells these three stories. And I think Jesus is making a statement about what it means to follow him. It means caring for those who are far from God. It means valuing those who are far from God. And it means loving those who are far from God. And Jesus is inviting all of us to join the search party. And he's inviting all of us to take place in the celebration. Next week, the next 2 weeks, we're changing our series. Next 2 weeks, we're going to talk about the new purpose statement for our church. Some of you already know it. Some of you have been a part of the conversations or seen different stages of it. And so we're going to unveil that in the next 2 weeks, and I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm excited about that. But we have to be clear, right, that central to that purpose statement that we're working on right now, and central to what needs to be about our church, are these three stories and the one point that Jesus is trying to get across. That central to the heart of God are people who are far from God. And so that needs to be a part of our church. But I want to be clear, it really doesn't matter what we write down on a piece of paper or brand or put on something. It needs to be central to each of our hearts. We need to care. We need to be longing to see. We need to be engaged in the search party to find those who are far from God and bring them near. And the fact that we may be indifferent, or we may not be caring at all, or the fact that we may be like this very brother, even hostile to the idea, we are not interested in getting those people into here. If that is the case, and we have to check our hearts, if that's the case, then we are far from God. We are far from God, and we've come a long way from who Jesus was and what he calls his church to be and what it means to be a follower of him. And so as we close this morning, I just ask the question, which brother are you? Which brother are you most like? I pray and hope that you're not entirely like either of them. Which brother are you? Are you the brother who's out in the pig pen, who's squandered his inheritance, who's ruined his life, who's hurting and suffering and broken and just wants to come home Or are you the brother who's in the house, but bitter and angry and a million miles away from the heart of God? Close to him in proximity, far from him spiritually. Or maybe some of us are a little bit of both of the brothers. Maybe you're a little bit of both. I want you to know that the God of heaven, he cares for you. He values you, and he loves you. And he's ready to welcome you home. He's ready to welcome you home. No matter which one you are, he's ready to welcome you home. As we close this morning, we're going to close with a song, and the worship team's going to come up. And I want to invite you to respond to the God of heaven who is searching for you right now, who is longing for you to come home. Whether you're near to him or far from him, I invite all of us this morning to close and to come to him and to draw near. Would you join me in prayer? Lord Jesus, we just thank you for these 3 stories that you shared with us. And we're challenged this morning to reorient our heart with yours. And you are a God who loves those who are lost. And maybe some of us this morning feel lost. We feel broken. We feel hurting. We feel like we do not belong here. And yet your word reminds us that we are precisely the ones who belong here. We are precisely the ones who you've come for. We are the ones you're searching for. And so, Lord, I just thank you that you are a God who cares for us, who values us, and who loves us even though we don't deserve it. And you, Lord, are searching for us and welcoming us home. Lord, but we also are reminded that some of us are near to you, and we're in the house, but we've lost sight of who you are. We've lost sight of who you are. We've lost sight of the things that you care about. We lost sight of the fact that you care about those who are far from you. We've lost sight of the fact that you've come to rescue the lost. You've not come to create a club. You've come to rescue the lost. And Lord, would you reorient our heart with yours? And might we be reminded that you care for us, that you value us, and that you love us. And that there's nothing better to give our lives to than the search that you're on and the celebration that comes with it. We give you thanks for the sacrifice that you made on the cross, and for the salvation that you have purchased for us, and for the love, the care, and the value that you give us. Without you, we are nothing, God. With you, we have everything we've ever needed. Amen.